Jeannie, if you want to turn on the recording. There we go. So you all know there is a recording, and I'm going to drop the agenda in the chat one more time so that it's part of the recording. Going to give the CAG leadership as well as EPA any chance to make some very quick presentations. But as you know, you had two voluminous documents, and EPA has now poured through responses or comments on those documents, and they now have responses. So that's a lot of stuff. So keep updates short if you would, and then we'll try to cover as much as we can of these topics and then open it up to anything else. The site boundary and whether it might change. The analyte list and chemicals of concern, whether that list is growing, contracting, et cetera. Molybdenum, its presence on the site, et cetera. And then emerging contaminants as a fourth topic before we then just open it up to anything and everything else. Bonnie and Tom, first, any update that you want to start with?
Yes, I do.
And then I'll ask Linda to do the same.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Tom sent out his comments on some of the agenda items today. I appreciate this opportunity to give you two updates and one statement from the CAG. I'll try not to make it long. But then I also want to say, as you said, Michael, this is a voluminous report of an answer and of a response. And so in order to make this easier, we have 5 basic comments we want to give about the responses from EPA. And in those comments, we've made a request. And so we would like to lead off with a couple of announcements, a statement from the CAG board from John Barber, and then I would like to give our 5 responses. It'll take just a few minutes, but we're requesting this be done because when there's a presentation by EPA, we never seem to get back to the community interests. So I will send out, if EPA wants them, and if the state wants them, I will send out the responses that we're concerned about. There are 5 of them. And then I will send out written copies if you want them. I don't know what EPA plans on doing with anything that we respond to today, but we want to get them on the record. So the first update I want to give is that we went to a public meeting on a brand new building that the Lowry Landfill Superfund site is planning. We went to that meeting and it was regarding a new recycling facility that they want to build right next to the Lowry Landfill Superfund site in Section 5. At that meeting, we asked the people that were presenting on behalf of waste management. The first question was, why in this map that you have given us is the Lowry Landfill Superfund site now called the Lowry Trust Landfill? And the people that were responding to us said, because that's the name of the landfill. And Tom Krause said, well, why don't you just call it what it is? Lowry Landfill Superfund site. So that's the first thing that has us questioning. And we're wondering if EPA, usually they say we can't get involved in development activities and everything, but we have some real concerns about this and we voiced them at the public meeting the other night. And one of the very first concerns we have is that this site is going to be built directly next to the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. And we're very concerned about all of the construction activity, all the heavy equipment and everything, and what impact it'll have on the unlined pits at the Superfund site. When we asked Waste Management if they would commit to doing a really well-designed engineering study to see what this could cause to happen with vibrations, so on and so forth on the Superfund site, they said, we don't have to, that's not our site. And so because they are planning to do something that directly impacts, in our opinion, the possibility of vibrations causing some of the pits to breach and bleed down into our aquifers, we asked them if they would commit to doing this study, and they said no, that we have to present our presentation to Arapahoe County, and what Arapahoe County decides, if they approve the plan, then we'll move forward. So we're raising an alarm tonight about what we're worried about on the trust on the Superfund site from building this humongous building right next to it and all the vibrations. They already have a lot of vibrations going on at the site with heavy trucks and heavy equipment coming and going. And so we'd like this looked into. We have a feeling EPA is going to say the same thing they did about our Murphy Creek concerns. We don't get into development issues, but we think this is serious and we are going to push forward on this. And Lisa Gnur, I see that you're on tonight. Would you mind telling me what your advice would be on how we can get our concerns to Arapahoe County before Arapahoe County has approved this plan? Are you on, Lisa? Okay, evidently she had to leave for a bit. So I'm just going to say that we will contact Arapahoe County Planning early on to find out if this will be kept in the radar for what's going on in Arapahoe County. That is the very first that's the very first announcement that we have. We need to know how Arapahoe County goes forward before planning approves this plan. And so that's our major question. We don't know if EPA is interested in what may happen to this site with all this activity around it. And we just like to know that somebody's going to be paying attention other than us. John Barber would like to make a statement on behalf of the CAG.
Do you want me to go ahead now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bonnie. I really wanted to do this to close of last meeting, but we came out, we were at the very end of the meeting. We went over a little bit, and so I just chose to not do it and see if I could make the follow-up comments today. So at our last CAG meeting, which was held on August 19th, 2021, on the agenda and our main focus for the meeting was discussion regarding the 2017 5-year review and the public comments that had been received by the EPA regarding that 5-year review. That all the comments had been received, the EPA said all the comments had been received and public comment time period was expired. We were told at this time that the EPA has declared the site safe at the point of compliance following the recommendation of the ROD. The EPA has also stated that there is no risk of human exposure at this time. Additionally, there was a document sent out about the Superfund human exposure dashboard, which the EPA declared the Lowry landfill Superfund site under control. As I stated earlier, the agenda at this meeting was to discuss public comment about the 2017 5-year review. It was explained to the CAG that while our comments were appreciated and they were answered in writing, they did not consider our comments valid or our concerns, and they were dismissed as such. We were told at the meeting that the time for public comment had come to an end, and the only and sole public comment or voice of concern that was given to the EPA came from the CAG. We were told there was, at the close of the public comment period, no other comments or concerns expressed by any other person or entity given to the EPA in response to their stand that the site has been declared safe at the point of compliance and there is no human risk exposure. Attending this meeting were State of Colorado Health Department, City of Aurora, Arapahoe County, City of Denver, and the Tri-County Health Department, although the Tri-County Health Department.
You're cutting out, John. You muted yourself.
Okay, what did I last say? Sorry.
County Health.
Go ahead with what you were saying.
Okay. Did you hear the 5 entities that I listed?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, based on these facts, it was alarming to us that no one outside the CAG had any public comment. We took this to mean that all previously mentioned entities were in full agreement with the EPA assessment. We were obviously very concerned about this public agreement from all of these entities at this point in time, especially considering the liability these entities carry with this site. The reason we bring this up is to make sure that we as a CAG have a clear understanding from the entities involved that have not commented. that they are in full agreement with EPA and WSDs on the current assessment of the 2017 5-year review. That their no comment means the public record shows every entity except the CAG are in full agreement with the EPA and WSD's current assessment of the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. So that the public record shows, and the CAG is clear, we must ask if our understanding is correct. And we ask that you would please respond so that we have a clear understanding in the public record. Thank you.
Okay. We'd like to have a response at some point in time during this discussion on this fact. The last thing I'd like to do is bring Paula in to give her thoughts on the new recycling facility and EPA's role. I'm sorry, Paula, I got shook up because I couldn't find Lisa. So you're next. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. I'm going to read a statement that came to me while I was on my walk earlier today. Those of us who live near the zone of concern from Lowry Landfill Superfund site are worried that vibration disturbance due to fracking and its associated operations, explosives use, seismic testing, and other actions, such as developing the nearby properties for industrial use, can potentially change the geology proximate to any Superfund site, particularly the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. Since there is a proposal pending for the construction of a facility within a few hundred feet of the 138 million gallons of toxic waste in unlined pits, the concerns are immediate and need to be brought to the attention of the EPA. A question to the EPA: why is it, given the primary necessity of ensuring the structural integrity of Superfund sites, especially ones which are not remedied but merely filled and capped with no liner underneath, why is it you do not require seismic testing before property near the site is developed? We, the public, in this case the CAG, should not have to be asking you, the EPA, for guidelines and information for preventing structural damages to the site from vibration sources, seismic activity, explosives, heavy truck traffic, or industrial operations. This information should be given to all parties as part of what you will do, should do, before any development of any kind takes place near a Superfund site. We, the public, have been told that, quote, if any concerns, end quote, for the Lowry Landfill Superfund site arise, they would be addressed should that change the status that the EPA has given as it is under control. This would mean any disturbance would already have occurred, and then you would investigate how to deal with it. We have no assurance that the geology within the ground, this Superfund site is static, and that you, the EPA, cannot say that the above mentioned disturbances would not change that. You, as the agency responsible for protecting the environment, must consider all aquifers and the environmental impacts near the facility before the ground is broken for development. Protection does not only take place after the fact, as in the case of a remedy. Protection takes place before the fact, and in this case, requiring testing and studies to be done to ensure no geological disturbances will impact the buried toxins and endanger the public and the environment.
Okay, thank you, Paula.
You're welcome.
I think that is, if there are no questions, are there questions? Well, like I said before, we will send hard copies to anyone who would like copies of what we have just expressed tonight. We aren't sure at this point in time where EPA is going towards working with the CAG or not working with the CAG. We also, as you're all aware, we are now not funded due to my own problem that I did not submit our 10-day letter of intent in time. I have submitted the grant application. I asked EPAs to say where that stood now. It's been over a month since we applied. CISA sent me an email back that the upper management is reviewing it and will get back to us in the next few weeks. We're trying to be hopeful, but last time we got an extension, it took over a year to get that approved. So anyway, whoever would like our comments in writing, we'll be happy to send them out to you. Until we get funded, we're not able to do some of the issues that we think are important, but we want to move forward with our comments anyway. And like I said, the community never gets a chance to present their important issues because when EPA presents, it takes up the whole time in the discussion. So I'm going to very quickly, if you bear with me, I'm going to give you the 5 items out of the entire response, because as you say, it's quite an amount of work. Thank you for the answers, EPA. I would like to first ask that the next time we have a technical discussion, which these responses are pretty technical, that when we get our funding back, the place to have this kind of a technical meeting would be in a technical meeting with EPA and the WSDs and state and everybody. And we would like to know that when we get funded again, if we get funded again, could we please have a technical meeting so the technical people can discuss this and come up with this technical reasoning before we have comment time. Second thing is, we have 5 issues that we want to give you, and it won't take me long, I promise you. The first question, please let me know if you want a copy of this. The first question we have a response on the EPA's response is, please note on the cover page, these are not decision documents that are technical Superfund site documents. And we're asking, please explain why these are not decision documents when EPA is moving forward using these documents for the 5th 5-year review, which will be considering final decisions for the 5th 5-year review. That's the first question we have. The second question is on page 3, and the response is, the relevance of the comment has been superseded by CSM update. Our question, the CAG continues to insist the approximate site boundary is actually the historic facility boundary within the ROD point of compliance. To the best of our knowledge, there's been no significant investigation or monitoring of the deep vertical transport of contaminants through the lignite layer and into deeper groundwater below, where monitoring has found multiple COCs in lignite layer, including concentrations of 1,4-dioxane above state standards. EPA has not extended the Superfund site point of compliance and boundary to include the offsite plume in the north end. Therefore, the CAG does not consider the updated CSM a valid Lowry landfill Superfund site finding study. The next question, the response we have is on page 4, down under the response to comment form. The term supplemental site review is not a RCRA, CERCLA, or Superfund term, as the EPA's 5-year review process is comprehensive. The EPA will not be conducting a Superfund site review. And so it is time for us to make an actual request to EPA. And it is time to conduct treatability studies under CERCLA EPA 540 R-92-071A in order to update and improve the 1992 HLA remedial investigation. The 92 remedial elevation for the ROD describes the site has no bearing on the Denver aquifer at the north end, which is closer to the surface. Please accept this as a formal request to EPA to conduct CERCLA-approved treatability studies under that CERCLA number, and this formal request will be followed up through a written request. And then on the treatability studies further, the 1992 remedial investigation for the ROD described site has no bearing on the Denver aquifer at the north end, which is closer to the surface. Please accept this formal request, and I will be sending this in formally to EPA. 2 more. Under page 40, selected containment remedy. The selected site-wide remedy of containment for Lowry landfill was an EPA preferred remedy for landfills nationally in 1994 because it is the cheapest in the short term and removes the risk of transporting, disposing of that waste. It is almost 40 years later. Technology has improved and should be investigated for methods to remove the massive chemicals that continue to lie in 73 unlined pits lying directly over 4 major Colorado aquifers. We will never know if the almost 40-year-old selected site-wide remedy is effective deep under the pits until there is a concentrated investigation in the deep hydrogeology deeper than 80 feet. As the U.S. Congress of Office of Technology Assessment Strategies for Hazardous Waste Control states, experience to date with cleanups indicates that rather high impermanence factors are likely with the widespread use of containment and land disposal for cleanups because these methods are known not to be permanent effectively. Continuing operating maintenance costs can also account for high impermanence factors. The last comment we have is on page 45, our technical assistance grant. Based on the Lowry Landfill Superfund site tax failure to demonstrate responsible grant management practices, EPA has imposed specific conditions. When EPA imposed the specific conditions to demonstrate responsible grant management practices, the TAG complied with the requirements throughout the remainder of the grant time. We do not understand why EPA continues to expound on this subject unless EPA is looking for an excuse to deny future funding through the TAG program. Please define for the TAG 1, did our overspending break a law? Please clarify the law we broke. Was the rule we broke just a bad judgment call on our part? We believe that Waste Management is putting pressure on EPA to find a reason to block our grant application because they do not want further investigation or having to spend trust fund money. Quite a few years ago at a major meeting at the site where people were milling around and having viewed the site, I heard the manager of Dad's facility tell the manager of closed facility that he had better keep Superfund issues separate from Dad's because if they didn't, Dad's would sue the closed facilities. Is this part of the pressure we're seeing now on getting a grant for our TAG? Now, anyone who would like these written comments, I'll be happy to send them to you. Any questions you have now, we welcome. But we wanted to get those comments in before EPA started with their presentation because we usually don't get to the other issues. Tom is quite anxious to comment on his molybdenum issues. And so that's enough time for me, and thank you for your patience.
Okay, so let me give you the floor. If there are some of those things that you can quickly respond to, great. If not, and you just need another time to do that, and you don't want to take the time because you want to get to these topics, just let us know how you want to proceed, and we'll keep notes on the things that don't happen tonight.
I'll do what I can. There was a lot there, and yeah. I appreciate all the thoughts and efforts that you have put into your comments today. Some of it, I just want to say up front, the work selling defendants do not put pressure on EPA to do anything. Just wanted to make that clear. That does not happen. So I'll go into my my updates. And the first thing I had was to thank you for submitting all your comments. It did take a lot of effort and time on your part and really trying to understand the site. And we do appreciate that. And the EPA's responses to the comments that we received between April and July went out to the group on September 21st, and then also as an attachment to this meeting. So if you didn't receive those responses, reach out to Lisa and we'll make sure that you get them. Some of the comments were on the conceptual site model and the north boundary barrier wall containment system. The comments that we included into those documents have been incorporated, and those 2 documents were finalized in October. That was really the remaining issues that we had to finish for the issues and recommendations for the 2017 5-year review. So as of now, all of those issues and recommendations have been addressed. So that was the 4th 5-year review that we've completed on the site. We started the 5th 5-year review in April. And going to John's comments, part of our 5-year review process is for us to interview community members, local governments. So our contractor SKIO reached out to the CAG members, and also City of Aurora, Tri-County Health, elected officials. There was a large group of people that they reached out to and offered either to take verbal comments through interviews or written comments. That process was completed at the end of June. All that information that was provided, those comments, will be in the next 5-year review. So those are documented in there and in the public record, and are part of that. We're still, the 5-year review process is long. I'll just put it, takes several months, and review from the state, from our headquarters. So we're still going through that process right now. We're hoping to have that completed soon, and that will be coming out. So no one was excluded from that process that I'm aware of. If you were, please, or know someone that was, please let me know. Let's see, what else do we have here? As far as
Linda, I just have a quick follow-up. If I understand what you're saying that there were other comments out there that were made by other entities. We just didn't see them, or we misunderstood when you said we were the only one that made a comment. Just trying to understand what you're saying when you say
right.
all the other entities heard, and you made it sound like you did get some responses,
Right.
but I just
Yeah,
trying
so we received responses from City of Aurora, Arapahoe County, the state. And so I think before, in August, or whenever the question was posed to us, it might have been in an email, what community, we interpreted as what community members had given comments. So of the community members that gave comments, they were from the members of the CAG. We didn't receive any from a community member outside of the CAG. But as far as local agencies, yes, they did submit comments. Oh, and then the work selling defendants also submitted comments.
So is the process to not be transparent with any of them except for ours?
In terms of transparent in what way?
Well, at the last meeting, it was my understanding that CAG was the only one that responded with questions. That was the impression I got from you and the other people on the call. And now you're saying, oh, well, there were public comments from other entities, other governmental entities, but I don't know that we've ever seen those. But we have seen the CAG's response, and we have vetted out what the CAG had to say. But what happens with everything else?
So typically, we put those comments in the 5-year review. So we don't publish them out for people to look at until the 5-year review comes out.
So why do we vet the public comments from the CAG but not the others? It doesn't seem, it seems strange to me that you would put so much focus on what we have to say and the other comments you just put in the 5-year review and move on.
Can I just jump in? I think there might be confusion here between comments on the 5-year review, where we reach out to everyone to give us comments about the whole site in general. Those are the ones that we have from everyone. I think maybe, John, what you heard was in terms of the 2 documents that were out for review, and And the CAG gave us all your comments, and that's what we're responding to today. Those two documents do not have any other comments from outside agencies, from other agencies. So there's the two documents on the one hand, and the 5-year review, 2022 5-year review that is coming up. Those are two different things. So I think that's where the confusion is here.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm clear on it. What I hear you saying is that we're the only ones that made public comments. And so when you were making reference, no one else commented to our comments, but there were comments originally to the 2017 review that have never been brought forward. That's what I hear you saying.
These are the comments that the CAG has asked about in the past that may come from CDPHE or Tri-County Health. Those are done in a fluid back and forth manner and not in written form. And we have responded to you guys about that in the past. So as far as those comments.
So Lisa, what I hear you saying, Lisa, is that we have meetings that are fluid and we discuss things behind the curtain, and then we come out with comments after the fact, and the CAG's never involved in that. That's what I hear you saying. You don't have those fluid conversations with us, but you do with everybody else. Do I understand what you're saying?
With all the technical team from the agencies, yes.
And we're not allowed to be a part of that.
Well, they're not in written form.
Are they recorded?
No.
So how are we supposed to understand any of that? That doesn't even make any sense to me, because you don't do that with us. Why do you do it with them?
I know.
It's because we're not politicians and because we don't have a political agenda or we don't have a political cost. We're just citizens that are concerned. I just don't understand.
So John, with our community involvement, we have different ways that we involve the community. And for this specific Lowry CAG, because we knew that you were more interested in providing information on technical documents and input, we created a special category of public review where we put that out for you to read, review, comment, and then we write our responses. That is something specific only to this site, and it was created so that the community members could give input on technical documents. And then I want to, this goes to one of Bonnie's points. So what a decision document is, it's a specific EPA term. And those are the record of decision, an amendment to the record of decision, a minor ROD modification, and an explanation of significant differences. Those are all the governing documents of how we operate at the site to manage the contamination. So we call those decision documents. Technical documents are things like the conceptual site model, the north boundary barrier wall containment system evaluation. The decision documents were required by law to put those out for public comment. Technical documents, which the two we just did, we're not required to do that by law. We did that so that the community can give us comments on them because we wanted to hear what you had to say. So we do want your input. It might not be the way that you want it to be, but we created this just so that the CAG could give input.
And you know what, Linda, we really do appreciate the opportunity to comment. Sincerely, I know that we as a group do appreciate that. But what falls back here is the trust issue, that things happen that we aren't aware of, that we can't be a part of, that we can't participate in. So we don't know what the process is. So the end conclusion comes out as though you're all agreed. And here it is, bam, stake in the ground. There's nothing you can do about it. Let's move on. And we don't understand how you got there. That's why I read the comment I read. Seems like everybody's in agreement but us. And it's like, it's very confusing when those kind of things happen. It's confusing to us in the public because we don't see what goes on, and we have to get assertive just to get you to admit that those meetings are even taking place, and they're not recorded. There's no notes, there's no minutes, there's no nothing. So it's like, wow, how are we supposed to trust that as a community? when all the entities get together and engage in that kind of activity, except for us. You understand what I'm saying, I'm sure.
I do. But I also, the thing that really gets kind of lost in this whole situation is this site is 30, 40 years old. The Superfund process, and Bonnie and Tom were at the Arapahoe County Commissioner work session when and I've talked about the Superfund process itself. This started in the 80s and 90s, and it is the process we follow by law. So the record of decision was put into place in the 90s. So it's all built upon it. All during those steps, past community members have given comments, and Bonnie has been part of that. Bonnie's given comments on the site for over 30 years. So we don't create new processes like the CAG asked for a supplemental site investigation. That happened in the 90s. So we're building on that now, and then we come to the end of everything too. We don't restart everything. We follow the process that we have existing. So I know it's probably not comforting at all to you, but I don't have the authority to go back and change the record of decision that community put into place at that time.
I think, Linda, that everybody on this call is clear with our concern. They just aren't doing anything about it because they're bound politically to keep things behind the curtain, because if they're exposed, the expedient lawsuit thing gets out of control because we live in a crazy environment. So I understand why Arapahoe County or the city of Aurora, or they can't come out publicly and say what we're saying or come after you the way we are, because that causes all kinds of issues. I get that, but what's really frustrating is we don't get to hear and see. And I think you're talking about process and what things have always been, and you're skirting around the fact that we can't participate in any of the legal or any of the technical things that go on. They're all done somewhere else in another meeting in another place that's not recorded. It's not minutes. And then you come back out and you tell us, here we are all together, and you're the only one that disagrees, let's move on. And so I know you're not going to answer that, because that is just the way it is, and that's too bad, so sad, because that's what you're saying. But I think everybody on this call understands the frustration we carry with that process, and it's been going on for a long time. And I understand from Bonnie, it didn't used to be like that, but when they had the 2007 consent decree, it all stopped because of lawsuit threats. So I understand you're not going to do anything about it. I just want everybody on this call to understand why we get frustrated and why we keep coming back, because we can't participate in the process. That is very frustrating.
Yeah.
And
So if I can,
it just breaks trust.
Yeah, the CAG has made the request, and that request has been answered in at least 4 of the meetings that I've been the facilitator for. The request is to do these meetings in public, and EPA and the agencies have said they do their technical meetings and then bring the information to the CAG. So you all have had this same perspective, the same clarification that you want 2 different processes. And so I think you are back where you are. The CAG has made that request.
Mike, listen,
the agencies have a
Mike,
different process.
you understand exactly what I'm saying.
I do.
And you're saying, yeah, they do get together, and yeah, they do talk. They are no minutes are up, and then they all come out in agreement. And if we have something to say, they bulldoze over us. That's what you're saying.
I don't think the last part's true. I think there's a separate process for the CAG.
Okay.
I think
That
you're right about
that separate process includes solidified agreement with all the other entities, as far as we know, because none of the other entities ever speak out. So as far as we know, there's always agreement with what the EPA says the current condition of the site is, and there's never been any kind of pushback anywhere from anybody except the CAG. And that's frustrating for us. And you get it, but you're not going to do anything about it. And neither is Linda. That's just the way it is. You can't participate. That's what you're saying.
No, you participate here, not there. That's what they're saying and have said
After the fact, after the decisions are made, we participate.
I don't know that that's what they said either. They took your comments and incorporated them. That's also what they said. But you all have repeated this not just in this meeting multiple times, but in multiple meetings. So I want you to
Okay.
move to the next agenda item. I think the concern is crystal clear that you want these meetings to be other than they are.
Well, the CAG is going to move forward. I appreciate John's concerns. So no matter how they may try to shut us out of the process, which we have never been this shut out in years, we feel like we've lost some good friends out there that we used to be able to rely on to at least express our concerns to. It's not happening now. And so the CAG is going to move on. We're going to do our best, no matter what anyone else does. And we're going to move forward and make some changes in our approach. And so we appreciate how you feel that we've asked and asked and asked, and we've been told and told and told, but we're not naughty teenagers who have just completely broken the rules. We're not, and we would like to be included, and that's the bottom line. So
Got it.
I feel that we need to move on.
Mhm. So Linda, I'm going to give you the floor for the 4 items.
Dr.
Are you-
McGinnis has a comment.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
thank you. No, I just, it's notable that Bonnie did ask for a technical meeting regarding some of the comments that so this more public forum may not always be super appropriate to get into the nitty gritty that is some of that discussion. It's a little bit hampered because it sounds like both these documents have been finalized before that can happen. We got the comment, the response, and then it's over. And maybe Linda can let us know what that kind of process would look like. But it also may still, even if those documents are finalized, provide an opportunity for a little bit more of an in-depth discussion. It's very difficult to have, I mean, the group did a great job by providing comments from both members and from the technical, from us. Because the comments from members can give Linda and Mike and y'all guys a really good idea of what maybe needs to be discussed in this more open forum, what the residents would like to hear about, what needs to be clarified, explained, or is the best use of this time.
Great.
Some of the nitty gritty we're getting down to where we have to advise the group where we have questions are often better addressed in a smaller forum within the experts that share that, the review of this and that kind of thing. And historically, that did happen when I first started working on this site. It has been absent for the last few years. And that was before, of course, COVID made that more challenging, but it can still happen. But it was definitely not happening before that. I think I've only had one technical meeting and one call in the last, 3 years, maybe, Bonnie, 4 years, that was part of that participation.
Yeah.
And then to finalize with what John's speaking of, most of my Superfund sites, I will see some comments from other state agencies and other involved agencies that will either be part of a technical dialogue informally or attach the comments and addressed. We don't see this. It seems to be solved behind closed doors, for which this group is excluded. And I think that is a mistake when you're looking at how to build trust and how to get just kind of get some control over the thought process going on here and get folks to have some faith in what you're doing. So I'll just leave it with that. I know that's a few things to hit on, but there is a moment right now to perhaps set up that technical meeting, get things going. We know we're in a rather inconvenient moment with funding that happens every few years, and these documents landing during that inconvenient gap has not been helpful, but we're certainly willing to continue to work with Bonnie and the group, as well as other interested parties in the middle. Even if it means a little pro bono work, we get it done. And I just think that
So I think
something that I'm sure Linda could be very helpful with, get through this inconvenient moment with the funding as a project manager, and as well as set up those meetings so that we can start hashing out some of this, or at least take what comments came up that are applicable to site management, even if the opportunity for the specific document is gone.
right.
And try to make a little progress.
I think the process concern has been made clearly and repeatedly. You have a substantive agenda that does have these technical things in it, and that's what you need to move to, because this can be a technical and substantive meeting. Process conversation you have had, and so now I want to give Linda the floor so that she can get to the substance.
Right. So I do want to reiterate that all the 5-year review items have been completed. So we are winding down. 4 years of really hard work from multiple parties and millions of dollars have been spent on that. I understand that you call our studies invalid, inadequate, but that is not what EPA believe. We stand behind our experts and the documents that we've produced. So the first thing you had was the site boundary. So does someone want to say what their question on the site boundary was? No.
Bonnie, do you want to chime in on that, or do you want me to? We had a couple questions about it too, but there was 3 or 4 different questions regarding site boundaries and the data in the.
Oh, go ahead,
It
Dietrich,
says-
because I'm not understanding why they don't know what our questions were. Are you talking about the first
It's not
question
that I
I
don't know,
asked?
Bonnie. I just would like you to, this be an interactive conversation.
I'm trying to do that, but I don't know what you're asking for.
Why don't
Are
you
you-
start with a specific, referring to a specific comment, Linda?
Well,
Is it
I
the-
agree. There were, like you said, there were several of them, so I grouped them together. So we do not change a remedy. And I can just read. I know you all have read our responses, but EPA can modify a remedy when the selected remedy changes with respect to scope, performance, or cost.
Yeah.
So none of those situations have been reached at the site. And then specifically with 1,4-dioxane, it has to be at an unacceptable risk level for us to even consider changing the remedy. The 1,4-dioxane with our risk assessment is well below the acceptable risk range. And so we will not be changing the site boundary. So that's the short answer.
Thank you, Linda. That's very clear. And it makes our efforts to say that the focus of EPA should be at and within the point of compliance and the safety and the risk assessment there. The risk assessment on the north end does not justify what is happening within the point of compliance. And so that's our response, and that
You muted at the end. Does anyone else in the call want to say anything about the site boundary?
I think that, Bonnie, do you know you're muted, or were you done?
okay, what are you saying, Dietrich?
Oh, I was just making sure you were done.
Yes, I'm done.
Oh, okay, no, apologies, it may have been on my end, we had a little flip there on our thing. A lot of our questions regarding boundary, and there does seem, we have several questions that were marked, we just had to ask, was the question understood? Because when it was repeated in the answer, it didn't match what we asked. And this was kind of one of them. We saw a lot of application of the original assessment of the site applied to the north end, that we didn't feel like it was a regional assumption that was appropriate. That we looked for data specific to the north end investigation to justify some of those conclusions, and we weren't finding it. And a lot of this is because the site definition here is applied kind of at the other end of the spectrum where we see on Superfund. Instead of the extent of the pollution, it's referring specifically to the site historic boundary of the facility. So we kind of went back and forth on that. And what we were asking is as much, I mean, we can go through all the legalese we want or cite all the documentation or guidance we want. At the end of the day, there has to be a consistency in how the site is treated for the data to make any sense. And I think that's what we were really looking for. There's a convenient definition within Superfund, extent of the contamination, or the extent where we find site-derived materials. And that could be applied here and be effective at clarifying some of this, and I think also make some of this discussion easier. So I think we're coming at this from 2 different directions, Linda. I think within the technical documents, eventually, we've got to find some consistency because it just isn't consistent in either one. And it does make review and use of the documents a little more challenging than it should be.
Okay, anyone
Other-
else?
Yeah, other comments on the site boundary? Okay, Linda, analyte list.
Okay. So the next, it was on page 7 of the EPA responses, comment 3. The CAG wrote, all 29 analytes of concern need to be tested to see if they have reached the point of compliance. Right now, only 4 analytes indicator parameters are tested at the point of compliance. There are multiple disposal pits at the site. We are not aware of a study that has been done to show that all those disposal pits contain at least one of the 4 indicator chemicals. If the chemicals from a pit not containing one of the 4 perimeters, I think it means indicators, reaches the point of compliance, traveling by an independent pathway, those chemicals would escape without being recognized. And our response is, so all of the 29 analytes of concern are sampled at all compliance wells. The 4 indicator parameters referenced are only applicable to effectiveness monitoring wells. The purpose of the effectiveness wells is to assess the operational performance of each remedial component relative to its design, such as containment mass contained along the perimeter slurry wall, MW38 area and north boundary barrier wall area, gradient control in the north toe extraction system, and monitoring for potential vertical contaminant migration on site. The 4 analytes were selected during the development of the groundwater monitoring program as a conservative indicator of potential future contaminant mass migration. So it should be noted that in 2018, 1,4-dioxane was added as a 5th effectiveness monitoring analyte. So they test for all 29. So was that the question the CAG had, or what did I?
Did that help? Did that raise other questions? Does that make sense? That in fact, the wells are all tested for the 29?
Yes.
Good.
So the next thing up is molybdenum. So Tom, I don't know if you want to talk about your questions you sent out today.
Yeah, Tom, you want to kick us off?
I can do that. Basically, what the site did very thoroughly was to try to determine whether or not the molybdenum was a naturally occurring compound or whether or not it was man-made and came from the site. And they felt it was not man-made and didn't come from the site. There are a few other things they could do to verify that it's naturally occurring, but I'm not going to get into that part now. I think the most important part is that on page 44 of your answers, you state that the application of state standard to molybdenum or talk about the state standard for molybdenum in paragraph 2. You basically say, in order to make a determination that a naturally occurring compound is a contaminant, the agencies must be able to demonstrate a compound is associated with a man-made release, which you determined it did not happen, or whether it's associated with a man-made condition. And you did not at all in any of your studies determine whether it was associated with a man-made condition. I'd like to speak to that. I believe it is a man-made condition. The molybdenum was made soluble by a man-made change in environmental conditions. It was insoluble, a solid metal, for thousands of years until the month after cessation of potable water injection at the north end occurred. Within that month, we found molybdenum at 200 times the state state groundwater standard. So there's certainly, and also the molybdenum was found within the boundaries and just outside the boundaries of the site. So I think more information needs to be evaluated as to why did a solid metal suddenly become soluble. And if it's a man-made reason, which it most likely is because of how it happened, then it is a contaminant. And as a contaminant, it needs to be regulated as such. And I think that the state has to look at that as well. So first of all, the changes in environmental conditions need to be identified. You did not do that. References were given. I gave references out in the statement that I sent out this evening and before as to how they could figure out how the conditions changed. And the reference was, if you have any questions about that, there's people that are much more knowledgeable about that than I am that I can refer you to. So that's part of the molybdenum problem. The other problem is that the molybdenum at highest concentrations was found in a very narrow 4-foot primary flow pathway at MW113 EW1, right on the compliance boundary. The pathway needs to be studied and identified. In other words, where is it going within the sand lenses? And then once that's done, an extraction well needs to be placed within that same pathway, up gradient of the, where they found it, of the MW113 EW1. And a monitoring well needs to be placed in the pathway, down gradient. Both the monitoring well and the extraction wells that were selected by the EPA are higher, in other words, not as deep as the well in which it was found. And there is no indication that it's in the pathway because you haven't determined where that 4-foot wide pathway goes. So those wells are useless. They're not telling us whether or not they're not monitoring and they're not extracting in the right places. Then MW113 EW1 needs to be unplugged. So because it was plugged, so because you had too much molybdenum coming out of it and you couldn't treat all of it, you just plugged it. Well, and along with plugging it, you plug the 1,4-dioxane extracts that should be extracted from that well. And it's in that well, it was up to something like 90 to 95 micrograms per milliliter, way above 0.9. So you're letting that 1,4-dioxane be released. I also gave references on how to try to identify a primary flow pathway, and I'm glad to refer you to other experts who could help you do that. Any questions?
Yeah, Linda, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. So the WSD's put together a tech memo memorializing all the work that they have done to investigate the molybdenum, to put in a treatment system before it gets to the water treatment plant. And so I know there's several people like either Dave Wilmot or Paul or maybe Steve Funningsland. If someone can chime in and explain the Molly report. I put it in the link in the chat to that report. It is on EPA's website.
Hey, Paul, this is Dave. Can you respond to the comment, please?
I'll do the best I can. I was not the author of that report, but basically, Tom, what it is, we did not find any basis to indicate that it was Molly coming from the waste pits. We looked at 4 possible sources. Molly from the waste pits and the landfill, Molly from the sewage sludge, Molly from human sources that were introduced, such as grease that would have been used in drilling the wells, and naturally occurring minerals. We did not find any evidence that it was coming from the waste pits or Section 6 landfill. We couldn't identify it as being from the sewage sludge based on soil samples that we collected. We did not track down anything that showed that there had been a moly grease that was used in drilling. And we concluded that it was likely due to natural moly that was present in the deposits, the alluvial deposits, the bedrock deposits, that when the water level was drawn down, became entrained, became dissolved due to the change in the water level that occurred when we stopped injection and drew it down. We had a change of pH, a change of oxidation, and so forth that caused this to be mobilized. That's a quick overview summary. Linda's provided the report. We could certainly set up a time, talk about the report. Steve Funningsland was an author of that report. I think he's on this call. I don't know if he has anything to add.
So Paul, what about the specific comment about the fact that even a man-made component, if unleashed, not that that's a technical term, can become a contaminant and therefore you have to deal with it? Is that how you see the requirement?
Well, we do look at those, arsenic, manganese, those are commonly things that could be solubilized due to the presence, say, of a landfill. And we have been monitoring molybdenum around this area and watching it because we do have a discharge limit that we have to meet for the water that is discharged to Metro. So we have been characterizing it, and we put together this evaluation that Linda's referenced to look at what the nature extent of the molybdenum was and what was the causation. So we've been doing that.
Paul?
Yes, sir.
Just made my point. Your evaluation was whether it came from the site. And I'm not saying that it did come from the site. Your evaluation was that it was natural. I'm not saying that it wasn't natural. But these are your words. These are the words that you wrote to us. In order to make a determination that a naturally occurring compound is a contaminant, in other words, something you have to deal with, the agency must be able to demonstrate the compound is associated with a man-made release or condition. It is associated with a man-made condition. You just said that. You changed the water level, you changed the pH, you changed the EH, and it became soluble. So now it's your responsibility to clean it up, and it's the state's responsibility to hold you responsible.
And Tom, we are pumping the water. We have a well up gradient of that extracts this water. It's part of the same water that we're extracting for the 1,4-dioxane. So,
and can I chime in for a minute?
Certainly.
That discussion about when it becomes a contaminant or not is based on the state groundwater regulations. And maybe I could, if Steve Fundingland is on, I think he wrote this memo. When we reviewed the memo, we did not see a substantial change in EH and pH between the time the moly showed up and before. And so while, yes, there's a suspicion that maybe something changed in the way the site was being managed that caused the molybdenum to show up, we couldn't verify it enough to be able to declare it a contaminant. And the other issue is, was there dilution? The other question was there substantial dilution happening when the injections were going on? In other words, was the moly always high, but we weren't seeing it because there was so much dilution water? And so based on our review of that molybdenum report or the tech memo, we couldn't definitively say that this new detection of molybdenum was caused by an activity at the Lowry landfill. If that evidence shows up, then yes, we can make that determination. But it's a difficult legal position that the state ends up being in with the groundwater standards to try to demonstrate that an entity has done something to cause a natural metal to become soluble. So it is something we haven't completely ruled out, but we don't have solid enough evidence at this point to say that that happened. And as Paul said, they are controlling it. So it's not migrating. It is being removed and treated, the soluble molybdenum. But ultimately, we're not going to make them clean up the source because the source is natural. What we need to do is monitor the condition, manage the condition, and hopefully, if it was something that was precipitated by a man-made activity, we're able to reverse it so that it remains in a solid form. If it was already soluble, then it really isn't the responsibility of the WSDs, and we haven't really been able to 100% sort that out yet. So, and again, Steve can talk a little bit more about the EH and pH evaluation that was done, but that was certainly looked at in the tech memo.
And I'm Steve Richtel. I would add and expand a little bit on what Colleen is saying. Whether it comes from the site, whether it's naturally occurring, regardless, we're extracting the groundwater, trying to create a cone of depression that will make sure that it's contained. We've added treatment processes at the water treatment plant specifically to deal with molybdenum and have been effectively removing and treating it.
That's true. And the problem, Steve, I'm sorry, are people hearing me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
You are extracting it, but you're not telling us what also happened is that you could not treat all that you were extracting. So what did you do? You put a plug in the well that had the most molybdenum, and it was the deepest well in the entire area. And when you put that plug in, you also reduced the extraction, how much you were extracting from that well. So from the well that had the most molybdenum, you cut off the bottom part of it so that it couldn't be pulled out. You also cut off in that bottom part was also a fair amount of 1,4-dioxane, which is no longer being pulled out. And you put a monitoring well in a place that was random without finding out which pathway the molybdenum was going. And you put an extraction well in a place that was random without finding which pathway the molybdenum was coming from. And so that statement that you've done your work doesn't hold water. And then as far as the other statement about whether or not the state can decide whether or not this is a condition change, well, look and see. They were testing for molybdenum for a long time before at the Lowry landfill site, because they had some concerns about molybdenum isotopes that were put there and whether or not they might be able to escape. So there should be something in there where the molybdenum was being tested before they started injecting water 18 years ago. But even if that's true, that they don't have any information on molybdenum then, how can you say that you can't ask the site what has been the change in conditions? And there's 6 different changes that can happen to create molybdenum to become soluble. And if those the conditions have changed, then that means that the Lowry Landfill Superfund site has been responsible for those changes, unless they can find something else that caused that. And if they've been, so if you don't ask them to find out what those conditions are, you're never going to find out whether or not they're responsible. And that means that molybdenum that's under that plug and that 1,4-dioxane that's under that plug is escaping northward.
So first, Tom, we did ask, and that was one of the things they looked at in this tech memo. We did ask them to try to figure out whether it had recently become soluble and how that might happen. So that was looked into. Regarding the monitoring of molybdenum before the injection started, the monitoring of molybdenum that they're doing, and the reason they caught it was at the wastewater treatment plant discharge. And so at that discharge point, before the extraction or before the injection ceased, there was a lot of dilution. So you're basically including your clean water in with your groundwater, that everything was diluted, and that's what you were testing molybdenum for at the discharge point. Once you eliminated the hundreds of thousands of gallons of injection water in your discharge stream, you suddenly had an impact, a high molybdenum number. So was that high molybdenum number based on something new coming out of the ground, or was it just based on lack of dilution water in the discharge? That's what I was trying to tell you. So we don't know what the concentration of dissolved molybdenum was in that monitoring well during the time they were injecting. All we know is what the concentration of molybdenum was in the discharge point during the time they were injecting, and then in the discharge point after they stopped injection. We don't know what molybdenum was historically in MW113 during, prior to injection, during injection, but we do know post-injection because that's when they started looking at it. So our data is somewhat limited to where did they collect data on molybdenum, and it was at the wastewater treatment plant discharge point, which included all of that dilution from all that injection water. And so it may have always been there. We just don't know because it was highly diluted by all of that injection water that was also being extracted. So does that make a little more sense what I was trying to get at as far as definitively saying that something changed in the underground versus changed in the discharge point?
Okay.
So Tom, can I step in just for 1 second here? The molybdenum, you're saying that the WSD stepped up and did a good thing on their own. However, we never heard about molybdenum of any sort coming out of the water treatment plant or anything until we read the Metro discharge permit, and they admitted that there was molybdenum and it was pretty good, a pretty high concentration. So I don't know if we had not asked questions about the molybdenum. I don't know for sure. And you can see Tom's worked very hard on this, but we'd like to know more about it. And we would like to know about what the source is instead of just saying, well, we don't like what's coming out of this well, so we'll plug it and go over here. That's disconcerting. And that's our my only concern. And the CAG has talked about this before. So Tom, I'm sorry I interrupted you. You still have the mic.
I think we still want to give it to the WSDs or the agencies to talk about the plug and the location of the wells.
Actually, I think Steve Fundingsland is on the online on the webinar, and he was the author of predominant author of the Molly report. He can answer a lot of Tom's questions around changing condition beyond maybe what Colleen responded to, as well as the geologic condition, which kind of has me a little concerned. Tom's comments about migration through some sort of preferential pathway. This area is, as it's talked about in the Molly report, it's a bowl. And we're pumping out of that bowl to, as she talked about, to reduce the groundwater elevation, make sure we have capture, and the concentrations are actually coming down significantly in order of magnitude or more since we've been pumping. So, Steve,
Yeah,
Funding
I want
Fund
to
is
say, yeah,
available.
I would like Steve Flemington to respond, but first I want to say, first of all, there has been no random well placements. I take offense to that. Every well at Lowry was put where it was for a specific scientific reason that's supported by a work plan and a report. And secondly, I want to correct the record that Bonnie, the molybdenum problem was self-reported. It was reported to Metro by the WSDs.
Steve, I'm sorry that you take offense. I don't mean to create offense, but the area where the molybdenum was found was MW 113, EW 1, is basically the deepest interface well between weathered and unweathered material. And yes, it's a low point, but there's no proof that it's a bowl. And it has been proven by the fact that there's another well that's 4.5 feet away that has well over an order of magnitude lower levels of the contaminants than the MW monitoring well EW1-1. So MW-EW-1 has a pathway that is only about 4 feet wide, and you did not determine where that pathway went, either up gradient or down gradient. So you could not say that the well went into that pathway. That's why I'm saying that it's in an appropriate position. You haven't done your homework beforehand to find out where that pathway is going.
Did you have something to add on this on the technical side of this?
Yeah, I just I try to put some calm to this discussion, and I think we need to follow up on Tom's question. So I don't want to take away from that, so I'll be brief. Particularly, when we have a concerned citizen doing this kind of homework, we need to be respectful and patient with it. But I think one of the important points that Tom's making is that the molybdenum may not have triggered a whole lot of like regulatory requirements. It's not the most toxic thing coming from the site or anything like that. But it provided an opportunity to get insight to the conditions that may be important to trying to solve some of the mysteries out there. Particularly if we have changes in water chemistry coming from the site that are causing these naturally occurring minerals to solubilize or otherwise change. I mean, I had the same experience with my comments. I asked something similar and I got told, I was referred to data that was over 40 years old. Well, that's really not the point. The idea was to look at what is current. We have a change, a shift in site conditions that may be insightful. We also know we have very much have preferential flow issues at this site. And I think as Tom was pointing out, we may have another sand channel to deal with here that might be important. We know we have them in that area. Even though they have them like in that specific spot. And there was just an opportunity to follow up with it. And again, it was the first step was covered in that report. And I can remember the meeting having some of these same discussions. What's from the site or not from the site? Is this something that's happening because of a change at that location? But we just didn't see those next few steps happen. And I think that was kind of important. I think it was an opportunity missed. And I think it still is to look at where that's coming from. Just why I have everybody's attention real quick. I am very confused because I was under the impression that this was something that was monitored for regularly, and then there was a spike in it, and that's why we're there. That's why it became an issue. Not that it was analyzed for that the monitoring from molybdenum was started at that point, and this was found. So I guess when you guys are done discussing, making sure Tom's questions are answered, particularly about the swell, well placement, the channel, et cetera, I would like to go back to that and just ask for clarification.
So anyone prepared to take up these
So,
questions?
Dietrich, molybdenum's not a contaminant of concern at the Superfund site. When they did the RI and they were determining what chemicals would be, there was not enough of it to even rise to that occasion. And Dustin, I think, has really looked at the data on that. Dustin, do you want to say anything?
I have,
Can we get Tom's
unfortunately,
question answered? I just
All right.
don't want to take from, I don't want to interrupt that flow of discussion, then we can come back to this. And I wasn't discussing molybdenum as a COC, but as something that was monitored for release, for the release from the treatment facility.
So is your question, is it on their permit at, with Metro? I don't
guess
understand.
If press, I'll provide clarification. And that's what I was trying to say. We know this isn't something that's, you know, there was a huge interest for this, for the site contamination itself, that there were other more pressing and dangerous things. My question was, Colleen had kind of had a discussion that seemed counter to what it was either Dave or Paul had, that this discovery came through regular monitoring. And that regular monitoring, not at the well point, but of course, we all know from the report and reading and learning about it, from the discharge from the treatment plant. So that this was a change in water chemistry that was observed. Listening to Colleen answer the question, and again, I may be misunderstanding you, Colleen, I'm sorry if I am, is
So yes,
that this was a new monitoring parameter.
No, that's not my understanding. And
Okay, thank you.
Dave and Steve can speak to this more, but when the report that we got that molybdenum had been found above the discharge limits, so obviously they were monitoring as part of their discharge permit. That's how they found it. So they were always monitoring it as part of the discharge permit. The change that I was talking about is it showed up after they stopped injecting. And one of the potential theories is that all that dilution water they were injecting and then extracting may have been the change in condition. It may not be a groundwater chemistry type change in condition. It might just be a dilution change in condition. And in reality, that would have meant that they were just basically returning things back to normal because they were no longer injecting. That's what I was trying to get across, is that when we're looking at the potential causes of whether it was sort of a man-made condition, the WSD's ceasing injection was basically returning things back to their natural state, which was without all that injected potable water. If the molybdenum was already there in a dissolved state, and we just couldn't see it because they were injecting so much potable water and then extracting it, and it was diluting the discharge, then it would still have been a natural condition, and it's not something that we can regulate under our state water quality regulations. If there was a change in chemical conditions or EHPH type thing that caused what was going on in the subsurface to change, that's a different thing. And we don't have that kind of data to be able to make that determination. At least I haven't seen it, because we weren't monitoring what was going on in the subsurface. We were just monitoring what was going on at the discharge point. Does that make more sense, Dietrich?
That makes a lot more sense, and I appreciate it. And
Okay.
I think that would be a very interesting discussion to pursue. And this is one of the reasons I found the molybdenum data to be interesting. Is first, it seemed appropriate to look at it site-wide as far as any chemistry changes that may have been missed in an earlier assessment. Again, that data 40 years ago would not be what we're looking at today. And second, what other parameters might have been affected by that dilution? What other questions should we be asking about the historical data as it is used for everything from trend analysis to understanding the geology? It just seems like it opens up a very interesting path.
Well, the problem though, Dietrich, is
one more pass at this, and then I want to come back to Tom's question, but go ahead.
One thing,
Colleen, finish up.
one thing to keep in mind, Dietrich, is the discharge is post-treatment. So you're not going to see, you won't be able to answer those questions based on the discharge because we treated everything. but they weren't treating molybdenum. So you really aren't, you shouldn't be seeing anything in the discharge generally because your treatment system should be working. So that data isn't going to tease out the kind of information that you're looking for because it was always post-treatment.
And Mike, I'm happy to put a pin in that so we don't go too far down that road and get back to Tom's question.
Yeah, because it's opening a whole other conversation. So I'm just looking for any EPA or WSD or agency clarification on the plugged well or the other questions that Tom finished with, and then we'll move to our fourth topic. So any other answers for the things that Tom raised?
Dustin, do you want to mention the data that you looked at from the RI on molybdenum?
I don't have it at my fingertips right now.
Okay.
I remember looking at the RI and there were, I don't remember the number of samples, but there were there was a sizable number of samples submitted for molybdenum. And there's a table in the back of the RI that summarizes the detections and why it didn't get carried forward as a COC or contaminant of concern.
Mm-hmm. And that's why we don't monitor for it as part of the.
And one other little point of clarification was it wasn't 1 month after cessation. It was actually about a year. I believe cessation was October 2018. And then the molybdenum in this well was around November 2019 when it was at 4,300 ppb.
So as the water levels decreased.
And concentrations, this is Steve Hungingsland, and concentrations and water level really are correlatable. As we draw down the water table at MW 113 EW1, moly concentrations have gone up. I do have one question though. We've talked about a plugged well, and could someone clarify what a plugged well is?
Steve, can you turn on your camera?
You put a bag in the well. That's not what
Right.
you.
So Tom, you know, why we're investigating it, we did put a packer in the well, and that was to prevent higher concentration moly from entering into the EW1 well and showing up to the water treatment plant. That
Right.
has been removed.
Oh, it has been removed.
Yes, and water levels are actually below that where that packer was. There's only about 9 feet of saturated water available to EW1 right now.
That's
So,
good. Then that's not an issue.
Okay.
One of the things that was brought up is that it was naturally soluble in that area, and it had nothing to do with the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. Now this map right here, and you probably can't see it real well, but it's USGS map, shows where molybdenum concentrations are throughout the United States. And the only place in Colorado where it's high concentration is that red dot, which is the molybdenum mines, Climax and Henderson. There is no naturally occurring concentration of molybdenum above, I think it is 40 micrograms per liter. I know that seems like a lot, but it's just not there. And so why should suddenly it happen at the Lowry Landfill Superfund site? I mean, they can't just say it's naturally could have been soluble. The next thing I have is that you only looked at the EH and the pH. There are 6 things that can cause molybdenum to be soluble. It's the cation exchange category, the redox conditions, the sediment iron oxide content, the pH, the total dissolved solids, whether sulfur is whether sulfur is present. All of those facilitates the molybdenum becoming soluble. And there is I put in my thing references to where to find out about that, how you can find that information. The other thing is that when you determine which of those things have changed or not, which of those things have caused the molybdenum to become soluble, then you can then go back and change those conditions so the molybdenum will go back to its solid state rather than trying to extract it and letting some of it go down. You did say that you reduced your pumping on molybdenum because you couldn't treat it all. So that means if it reduced the pumping and it's in a preferential pathway, then it's escaping from the site and going north.
So last responses to any of that? Okay.
Well, then I would just ask that, and I appreciate all the listening to a lot of this technical stuff. I would like to ask the state to please look at whether or not it's appropriate to just assume that it's naturally occurring when it very well may be that it's not, and whether or not something should be done to make sure that, rather than saying nobody has responsibility for it and it's naturally occurring, so if it goes down, then we don't care about it. But they ought to change and say, hey, we better find out if it's naturally occurring, and if so, do something about it.
And again, Tom, we did look at it, and the technical memo, discusses that, but we did look at it. We can only use the data that's available. We can't make regulatory decisions based on assumptions. We have discussed this with you guys in the past. I know I answered questions specifically that the CAG sent the state several months ago about our evaluation of the molybdenum and whether or not the water quality standards applied. And at this point, I don't have evidence that we can use to say that this is a contaminant that is subject to Reg 41. If we are able to find evidence that would demonstrate that, then we can reevaluate that. But yes, there are some theories out there. We don't understand 100% of what's going on because we don't have data prior to a certain date that we can look at to look at potential changes. But at this stage in time, the information we've seen isn't adequate to make a determination that it's not due to a naturally occurring condition. And it's not just that the molybdenum is present there physically, are the groundwater characteristics, say it be sulfur or iron or whatever, are those naturally occurring that could cause it to already be in a dissolved phase without any man-made interaction? And that's the question that we have to answer in order to make a determination that it became soluble based on a man-made condition. And we just don't have that link at this stage, and we may never. And so that's really what we have to look at from a regulatory standpoint is there a clear link that something that an entity did absolutely caused a condition to change that resulted in something being in a dissolved phase? And I don't have that linkage. So, we are looking at it, we have looked at it, and if we find any additional information, we can reevaluate that.
Well, that's certainly reasonable, but if you don't look for those 6 conditions that I just mentioned, you're never going to have that information. So,
again, but Tom, I don't have past data for those conditions to make a comparison to the future or to what's going on now. That's the part that's difficult. I can't go back and say 10 years ago, what was the concentration of sulfur in that well? If the data wasn't being collected, there's no way I can look at a comparison to what it is today. We can look at data going forward, but we can't go back and create data that didn't exist already prior to us detecting the molybdenum. Does that make sense?
I understand that. You can't look at the past data, but if you do find out what caused it to become soluble, you can look at the entire state and say that there is no place else where it's become soluble naturally at that amount. And it's not, and the USGS can also work with them because they know they've already mapped the whole entire United States to try to see where it is. So if it's totally unlikely that it ever comes soluble, why did it happen just here? And
Okay, keep in mind, Tom, the USGS doesn't have wells everywhere. They do have wells in a lot of places, but they only have wells where they have wells. So they only know what's going on in those places where they have wells, and they don't know what's going on in places where they don't have wells. So just keep that in mind. I've had other sites where we've had USGS wells close to our sites, and what's going on in the USGS well isn't necessarily what's going on in the site well. So, their data density isn't necessarily that great. Their scale between their wells is pretty big. And so, yes, they know where they have data to demonstrate what they know on that map, but there are a lot of places they don't have data and they're just making assumptions in between data points.
May I ask a question?
Okay.
May I interject here, please?
Sure. And then we'll move to the fourth topic.
I think this has been a good discussion, but I would really like to have time to talk about emerging contaminants.
Yep.
I want to hear what the EPA has to say about it. It's very important for our proposed next moves. So
Good.
can we, Tom, are you okay, or do you have any more?
Go ahead. Thanks for listening.
Okay. Linda, last topic.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very short in that in our 5-year review process, our contractor SKIO, who does the initial 5-year review, they look at emerging contaminants and see, is there any risk at the site to the public from emerging contaminants? That's one of their questions that they look at. So it is being considered in the next 5-year review. And that's what EPA does. And that's.
Questions about that?
No, so when SKIO looks at emerging contaminants, how do they know what might be emerging at Lowry Landfill Superfund site? I don't understand where you say they look at emerging contaminants. From where?
Right. They look at, is it a hazardous substance? Is there an MCL for it? Is there a state standard for it? Is it promulgated widely across the state? Is there a risk to the public from that particular chemical? So it's multifaceted, the things that they look at. And our headquarters also gives some input to it. So there's many emerging contaminants out there. So there's not one answer for one particular.
Okay, so you're saying this is a national list of new contaminants that may be of interest? Is that what you're saying?
From time to time, different chemicals make it on our emerging contaminant list, like 1,4-dioxane was back a long time ago. So yeah, there's different ones that come up. There's thousands of chemicals in the world.
Of course there are. And I'm just wondering if SKIO did a study on emerging contaminants for Lowry Landfill, they came away with no issues. Is that what you're saying?
The 5-year review is not finalized right as of yet, so I can't speak to what it says.
Okay.
So let me see if I understand it, and maybe this will help. SKIO is looking at emerging science, new science that says, hey, here's a chemical we haven't worried about, but there's a reason to worry now.
Yeah.
Because, right. So if they're not doing anything at Lowry, they're looking at chemical, at new chemicals of concern or new science that's coming out on risk from chemicals. And then that's being fed into the 5-year review. It's not a study of Lowry, it's a study of new and emerging risks.
Okay.
That we're understanding in science.
So I'm not understanding how SKIO's study did revealed anything about Lowry Landfill. Are they saying that what they looked at the national list, that it was not an issue at Lowry?
After the 5-year review comes out, we'll talk about it. I can't, it's not, the 5-year review has not been finalized.
Okay, that's fine. We will be sending a letter of request to EPA and the state regarding emerging chemicals that we are concerned about, and we'll be sending that out in the next week or so. But I just was trying to look at, if you did a review of it, and there's no emerging contaminants you're concerned about, then where do we go from there?
Okay. Others wanting on this question of emerging contaminants, new
Yes,
science?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I wanted to know if PFAs and endocrine disruptors are on that list. Either
know-
SKIO's list or your list of emerging contaminants.
Right. I'm not sure all the chemicals that are on there. I can get back to you on that one. I can see what the list is right now.
Okay, that would be good. We'd like to see what the list was that SKIO looked at and how they drew their conclusion. There were no emerging chemicals of concern at Lowry landfill. That I would like to see that
No,
list.
I didn't
Thank you.
say
I mean, I don't
that,
think that's,
right?
I don't think they reached the conclusion.
I said-
Okay, so help me understand what you are saying.
I'm saying the report is not finalized and I cannot speak to what it says.
Hmm.
And I say that to everyone who asked me that question. So you're not unique.
Okay, well, I'm sorry if I'm frustrating people, but this is an important issue to us. So thank you for helping us to clarify. And I'm sorry if it upset the apple cart, but it's just a very important issue to us. So
Yeah, no.
I
Bonnie,
appreciate
think
your help.
You're perfectly fine. It's important to be clear that no one has said that they haven't found any new or emerging contaminant. No one has said that. Look, report's not done.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing, and I'm just not understanding. So my frustration is coming from not understanding exactly what you're saying. I thought the last 5-year review was over. We keep being told that you're going on to the next 5-year review. I'm really confused by answers.
Yeah, I know. So the 2017 5-year review was done in 2017. In 2021, we did an addendum. And then we're doing, so that was the 4th 5-year review. That's done. It's been almost 5 years since the last one. So we're doing the next one, which is the 5th 5-year review, which is in our fiscal year 2022, and that will be coming out soon. So every 5 years. So time has gone really fast and we're up to the next one. It's been almost 5 years of having CAG meetings.
And that's the one where you should not have any assumptions about emerging contaminants because the report isn't written.
Right.
Excuse me, what did you just say, Michael?
That you shouldn't make any assumptions about how that report will speak to emerging contaminants because the report's not written.
Okay, but I can express concern about emerging contaminants
Absolutely.
to EPA and to the state,
Yeah,
whether a report has been written or not.
right.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, we have all of 12 minutes. If there is something that can be encapsulated in the last 12, and there's a quick question or a quick clarification on any of the things that you all commented on in the CSM or the North Boundary Barrier Wall System Evaluation. Sonia, got a hand, please.
I would like to make one last comment here because I didn't say anything because the discussion was going so well. But it's really irritating to the public when we're told by the agencies that there are no chemicals of concern in the water and they fail to admit that are above standards. The public needs to know that there may be chemicals of concern in the impacted water, but they're just not above standards, so the agencies are not required by the law to report them to the public. And that's frustrating for us to hear that. So we know that there are chemicals of concern in the water within the point of compliance deep that are chemicals of concern, but they didn't rise above the standards that they have to report them. So I would like to just clarify in future meetings, can we make that a clear statement when we're told that issue? It would be very helpful for the public who is involved in this every day to be able to understand that.
Sonia.
I wanted to just follow up on the very beginning part of the meeting when Paula was making comments about the vibrations, and I had some additional questions. So the question of vibrations at the site and the structural integrity of the site is of particular urgent concern to us because the state of Colorado is considering an application for a deep injection well for wastewater. And as you know, those kinds of wells have a documented history of producing induced tremors, significant ones, within 10 miles and beyond 10 miles. And this application is for within 10 miles. So I very much wanted to know if you could get back to us as soon as possible with the following information. Does the EPA have a general set of guidelines regarding possible vibrational impacts that might disrupt the site that you could send us the text of so we could be aware of that and understand what the guidelines are and any threshold levels that are set? And then additionally, if that's the case, if you have such guidelines pertaining to induced seismicity, truck traffic, explosions, other activities that could affect the site, do you have a specific standard for this site, an estimate in terms of a threshold that should not be exceeded? And we would like to know that as well.
So Sonia, we looked at because this came up in 2019, I think with the original application, and the Colorado oil and gas guy came to the meeting and talked about how they inject and everything. So EPA does not have guidelines or threshold standards or anything like that. We looked at that back in 2019 and we don't.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding you. You're saying that for these sites that are of national concern due to the specifically hazardous contaminants that you don't want to escape and you want the site to maintain structural integrity, that would be the primary objective, I would think. You're saying that for all those sites, there is no threshold, no standard which should not be exceeded in order to protect the integrity of the site?
Not that I'm aware of, no. Because we did look at this back in 2019. So I can check again and see if something's changed since that time, but not that I'm aware of.
I'm just flabbergasted that that's possible.
I mean, I can check and see what California does, if California has one, because I mean, they're more inclined to have earthquakes. You know, I can ask them what they do for their Superfund sites, but I'm not aware of any.
Okay, other thoughts, comments on any of the topics in the two documents that you reviewed or the responses to your comments from EPA?
Yes, I would, this is Margie Sobey. I would like to bring something up that I've brought up a couple of times, and it's similar to what John Barber talked about in the beginning, but it's not to do with the agencies. It has to do with general public communication, and I've asked before twice to find out which HOAs were notified. I was told that due to privacy reasons, I can't be told that. And my question, I do want to make a comment, but my question is, will you please furnish me with whatever law or rule or regulation there is that says you can't furnish that information? And then the comments I want to make are, I was told regarding Murphy Creek, where I live, that I should ask the HOA or the management company. Well, I'm the president of the HOA, and I did not receive anything, but I also contacted the management company who did not receive anything. And for the previous 5-year review, I was furnished with a statement from the people who were doing the community involvement so that I could publish it in a newsletter. But The reason I think that you're not telling me which HOAs you contacted is because you didn't contact any. I cannot understand why you would not contact at a minimum the HOAs of the neighborhood that is most significantly impacted. And I don't think that Traditions, where John Barber lives, was contacted. Why would you not contact the people who live nearest that site? So I don't believe you contacted anybody, my opinion.
I would confirm we have not been contacted to the best of my knowledge, and I'm engaged with the management company as well.
So one was Murphy Creek, and John, what's yours?
Traditions.
Traditions.
Traditions. Okay.
Yeah, I live on Thunderbird Estates. Richard and Tom and we live in Thunderbird Estates. We're all on well water. We're directly impacted by this site. And the HOA that we belong to, we never got notice that EPA was doing these interviews from the HOA here.
So I do want to receive a copy or a reference of what privacy law is preventing you from sharing that information. And then the last thing that I want to request, if it's appropriate.
I can let him in.
John had asked if the agencies could comment about whether they submitted anything to the EPA or not. And I guess what I would like to do, if there's a few minutes, is just sort of poll the agencies, and either they can tell us if they were in agreement, if they are not in agreement, or if they choose not to respond. I would just really like for all the agencies to step up and at least say that much.
So, Margie, the question is in agreement with what?
In agreement with the statements or the reports that EPA has issued about whether or not the site is, well, the community involvement. All of these things that the community was asked to comment on, the agencies were asked to comment on as well. And you all did say previously, I know you did, that nobody else responded except the CAG. Tonight, it's a completely different story. And since it is a different story, I'd really like the agencies to say whether or not they commented. And if they were in agreement with EPA's conclusions about the CSM, the North Boundary Barrier Wall, all of that.
Yeah, so for any of the agencies, if you have a response to that, that'd be great. Then we'll be done.
I think there's still some confusion about the comments. And we talked about this at the beginning of the meeting. We were asked to provide our comments to the 2022 5-year review. And yes, the state of Colorado did provide comments. That document has not been issued yet. So there are no conclusions or anything like that for us to say whether we agree with. We did provide comments. For the conceptual site model and the containment system evaluations, we were part of the drafting of those documents. All of the comments and technical issues that we identified in the drafts of those documents were incorporated into the final versions that were sent out for public comment. So we did not have additional comments after those documents were sent out for public comment, because all of our comments had already been incorporated into those documents. So those are two completely separate things. The containment system evaluation and the conceptual site model documents, we were involved in drafting and making sure our comments were addressed. In the 5-year review, we did provide comments, and that document has not been finalized.
So let me see if that's true for other agencies that want to weigh in, or if your experience is the same. I'm going to give you the chance if you want it.
I'm happy to chime in for Tri-County. Pretty much exactly what Colleen said is true also. So I had made a comment a little earlier too in the chat saying, try to make a difference between the documents. So Tri-County did the exact same thing. We also had an interview and made written comments specifically on the 5th 5-year review with SKIO. And then we were also involved with the technical meetings on the conceptual site model. And also, you know, we all just worked out our comments pretty much page by page. And so we also did not have any additional comments after that document was finalized, because Tri-County also was in those working meetings. And I guess just to throw out too, I mean, I know it's easy to say everybody agrees behind the scenes, but you know, the technical meetings, everybody doesn't agree. Things are hashed out more. Maybe there's some terms or, you know, the way something is presented that Tri-County would have, you know, fared it out.
Lynn, I have to say, Lynn, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to say that.
And you are.
Yeah, I know, because if I don't, I won't get a chance. But if we were a part of the things you are articulating and that Colleen articulated, 90% of the conversation at this meeting today would have been absolutely unnecessary. That's the problem. The misunderstandings, the stuff that's decided and vetted out and put to the table and everything, and then you all agree on what the process is going to be, and here it is. Now the CAG can respond to that. And you know, I understand
how we've done it, John. I'm just telling you that you asked what if the agencies had made comment, and we did, and the agencies were involved working together on the conceptual site model.
So are you saying, Lynn,
that your comments are unknown to us?
Each time?
You made comments, but you vetted them out with the group and then came to consensus and gave it, so we don't know the comments that you really had. Because there might have been some disagreement. We don't get to hear that.
That's right. So I got Maggie in for the last word, and then I'm going to give you back the rest of your evening. So Maggie, did you have something?
Yes, I do. I just want to point out that, you know, everybody was asking about the HOAs, and you might say that that's more of a private organization, but out here we have metro districts, which are, you know, quasi-governmental agencies. And I believe that those metro districts in all these areas out here should be being contacted, and ours was not.
Okay.
I'm the president of our metro district, and I was not contacted.
So we did put an ad in the newspaper asking for people to comment. So we did reach out through that method. I'll go and check and see what HOAs they reached out to. And Margie, email Lisa and we'll get your response.
Okay.
So Lynn, I've got a question.
Yeah, Richard, really quickly, and then we're gonna go.
Real quick, Lynn. So during these meetings with your groups, are you saying that y'all reach consensus each time? Reach consensus?
Oh, I think we lost her.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand where.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we lost her electronically.
Yeah.
Maybe Tom knows. Yeah, I mean, so these are technical discussions where issues of concern are raised and the merits on the various sides of the issues are discussed, and the experts, the hydrologists, the toxicologists, those kind of folks get into the weeds and hash out the issues. So I think the answer is yes, Richard, that there are issues raised that we don't agree on initially, that after discussion and evaluated merits, you come to a different conclusion.
Thank you.
Okay. Just a quick preview. We're going to get together as we always do. Tom, Bonnie, Janine, Lisa, me, and we will talk about your next agenda. It's my understanding that your practice is to meet not in a month, but to have one meeting between now and the end of the year, and to position it between the end of November, early December, so that there's only one meeting left in this year. But Tom and Bonnie and Janine and Lisa and I will get together. We'll talk schedule and agenda for your next meeting.
Hey, Mike,
Yep.
may I ask one favor, please? Our visitor, Bridget has asked a question. Can you please answer her, Linda?
I don't know. What's her question?
Question in the chat is, are there
It's
meetings?
in the chat.
These working, are there minutes of the working sessions that Lynn and Colleen and others, Tom, have described?
No.
That's a big problem. CDPHE, EPA, and Denver, no one keeps records of anything. So the Colorado Open Records Act is meaningless as far as you guys are concerned. To say that there are no minutes of meetings or are no agendas, we get the same thing at our CAG as well. And it is a real problem because the public is shut out. But that's just my opinion. So good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks,
Bridget.
all.
See you.
Bonnie and Tom will be in touch.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, thanks, everyone.
Adios.